we were gonna switch for each section that we did. We were gonna share like our own screen so that we could
Okay,
switch through.
sure.
I just wanted to let you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Luke Petty has started screen sharing.
Okay, everyone see it? Everyone see this?
We're seeing something that says loading.
Oh, okay.
There we
Good.
are.
Got it.
Mhm.
Ready. So, without Buddha, I cannot be a Christian, chapter 1. All right. So, this chapter starts off with discussing the transcendent other. And there's 3 images of God that Paul Knitter learns about in college that he describes as discomforting. And this view of the transcendent other, it means to view God as a being that exists up there, out there in heaven, somewhere unreachable. And Knitter remarks that while studying to become a priest, he was taught that God is the total other, the totaliter aliter.
Totalitaire aliter.
Totalitaire aliter. This is described as being infinitely beyond what we humans are. And that meaning that God is infinitely perfect, complete, and happy unto himself and needs nothing. God is completely self-sustaining and sufficient. All right. And the next section is called Another in Need of No Other. And it's basically saying God can only be God. I am who I am in that passage from Exodus. And he cannot be affected by others. And God does not need others at all. God is infinitely powerful, and God's capacity for love is infinite. Creation is the supreme sign of and expression of love, and so that it is so. Theologians explain precisely because this God, who is self-sufficient and perfect, didn't have to create. God had no need to create human life, but he did it for us anyway, for the sake of goodness sake. Like, we're lucky for simply existing as a species on a planet that was made perfect for us and beautiful, and we're able to live on it, but God did not have to do this at all. Right. And God was able to create all of this, the whole universe basically, from nothing. God's ability to create is beyond our understanding. Oh, I already said that. He created purely from scratch. Theologians have insisted on this for 2 reasons: to make sure that there was nothing around before creation, because it would have come from somewhere else besides God, meaning that this all came from God's own creation. There was nothing there for him to work with. And to make sure that God didn't spin the world out of God's self, because that would mean that the world is also God. And if that were the case, then we would be on the same level as God. And there needs to be a clear distinction between the two factories here, like the producer of the whole universe and the product being the universe. All right. This is a one-way street. God can certainly make a difference in our world, but the world can never make any difference to God. And this is because if the world were able to affect God, it would tarnish God's perfection and independence. And like I said, the book compares this relation to a one-way street. And in this section, it continues to go on about God's favor. Like, in some passages in the Bible, for example, it seems that God does favor the Jews over let's say that whoever they were in the region with, God does favor them. And the book explains that like there are bridges that connect God to this world. And if these bridges were everywhere, then there would be no distinction between the divine world and this world on earth. And when God acts on these bridges, it's more of a natural action and spontaneous. And this is ultimately up to if God chooses to influence the world or not. All right, dualism is the problem. Dualism is a state in which something has two distinct parts or aspects which are often opposite. So dualism in Christianity, it exists when Christians fail to distinguish between God and the world. This is a problem because God is infinite while the world is finite, and it creates two contradictory ideas about God. Christian dualism has so exaggerated the difference between God and the world that it cannot really show how the two form unity. And the knitter remarks in this section that this seems to be a common teaching, like within Christianity. It's pretty standard for the church to say that God is in every bit of the world. Like he has spread his influence there, but it's separate because this is our world and it's not as divine as God is. Hold on a sec. Add her up.
Okay, so the next section of this chapter is titled Passing Over, No God, Just Connections. And this title, it represents his switch from talking about his studies of Christianity and his studies of the ideologies of Christianity to his studies of Buddhism and Nirvana. So Nitter began studying Buddhism in his freshman year of college, and he was very surprised that Buddhism didn't have a God. And this led him to study Buddhism more intently because he wasn't able to apply what he had learned in other religions with them having a God to Buddhism because of, Buddhism not having a God and many other differences within the religion. Now, the first subsection of this section of the chapter is titled God Gets in the Way. And so Buddha wasn't trying to deny that God wasn't real, but he didn't want to have conversations about God get in the way of his conversations about the discoveries that he had while in meditation under the Bodhi tree, which is where he reached the state of nirvana. And with experiencing an awakening being their main goal, they wanted to discuss these experiences more than just talk about what they might think God is up to. And after he had his realization under the Bodhi tree, he gave his first sermon about his realizations, and it's described in the section titled A Short First Sermon. And in this sermon, Buddha lays out the Four Noble Truths, which are: 1, suffering or dukkha appears in everyone's life. Suffering is caused by craving or tanha, and suffering stops when craving stops, and following Buddha's Eightfold Path ends craving. Now, why does tanha cause dukkha, or why does craving cause suffering? Well, Buddha answered this and his answer was anicca, which is translated as impermanence. And what this means is that everything in the world is constantly changing and constantly in motion. But what really is the cause of that constant motion and constant change? Well, he describes that as being caused by, I don't know how to say that word.
You're absolved.
That one. And that translates directly to interdependent origination, which means that everything is changing because it's all interrelated, and that anything in the world that exists comes into existence through and with something else. Now, this interrelationship or interdependence on one another causes craving to cause suffering, because when you are trying to or like when you crave or want something, you're trying to grab it and make it your own and keep it from changing and moving. Well, that's going against the way that the world works and thus causing you suffering. It'd be like trying to swim upstream in a river. You're just hurting yourself more than what you're gaining. Now, what Buddhists are really after is that they're looking to reach nirvana and see that impermanence and interconnectedness that is in everything. Now, another thing that they look to find after reaching nirvana is sunyata, which is translates directly as emptiness, but not in the normal sense of emptiness. It means like the potential that there is for a room to be filled, or the potential that a pregnant woman has when giving birth and seeing what that child could grow into. Now,
Pema
Pema,
Chodron.
Pema Chodron, he is a American teacher of a Tibetan style of Buddhism, and he describes sunyata as groundlessness, meaning that there's really no place for anybody to stay consistently because of how everything is interconnected and constantly in motion. Now this moves to the section of a verb or an adverb. Now, someone trying to gain a deeper or a greater understanding of Buddhism might ask some questions like what I have here on the slide, which come from the book. It's, what is nirvana? Does it really exist? Or does it really exist in itself? Or is it just a universal description of how everything is and acts? Is it a verb, a real activity within it all? Or just an adverb, a description of how everything acts? Now, Buddha encountered and thought about these questions, although they are very Western and Christian, while he was alive. And he maintained that, well, nirvana is not really a verb or an adverb. You see, nirvana and sunyata do exist, but not in the sense that normal things would exist, because normal things have their existence because of their interdependence and interconnectedness with one another, whereas nirvana and sunyata are their interdependence and connectedness between each other. Now, that might not make much sense, but due to basically the nature of nirvana, it's hard to actually have a good understanding of it until you have attained it. And the next section, and the last section, subsection of this section, is it's right here now, meaning that it's nirvana is all around us. And they present this with the quote that is, nirvana is samsara. Well, samsara is the daily life that we live in with all its sufferings, all the good and bad things. And it's in this life where we would find or be able to reach nirvana. And this statement, it creates non-duality at its best in all reality, because nirvana and samsara cannot be separated, because nirvana relies on samsara being there for people to be able to attain nirvana, and you can't mush them together because of how different they are from one another, with samsara relating to the suffering that you experience in your everyday life, and nirvana going with the peace and happiness that you reach when you have a full understanding of it. And this non-duality is a lot like the Holy Trinity, because that the Holy Trinity, all three together make it as powerful as it is, but one single aspect of it being completely removed from the other really takes away all the advantages they have of being combined. Stop that.
Okay, the last section of this chapter is called Passing Back, God of the Connecting Spirit. And in this section, Nidda wants to describe how his passing over to the way Buddhists talk about nirvana and inner being has served as a guide in dealing with his quote-unquote problem with God. In this, he states that the Buddhist experience of nirvana and sunyata serve as a guide in shining its light forward and backwards. And what he means by this is he's able to go back and rediscover what parts of Christianity tradition have been all along. And he also is able to look forward, where he's recreating his traditions and exploring how he's going to do this. So the first subsection of this is called Becoming Mystics Again for the First Time. And what Knitter is saying is that for Christians, or that Christians must become mystics again. So, and it goes on to quote Karl Rahner by saying that in the future, Christians will be mystics or there will not be anything. And for a Christian to be a mystic or experience a mystic happening, God must be an experience before it can be a word, because without it, the divine is without content, meaning that this experience must touch you deep. It will fill you with wonder and gratitude, and you will realize that there are no adequate words to describe it. Knitter then says that without such a personal, mystical happening, one can't authentically call themselves religious. And when one does become a mystic, they become a loyal follower and an uncomfortable critic. And what an uncomfortable critic is talking about is like how both Buddha and Jesus, when they experienced their mystical happenings, they were comfortable and bravely saying and critiquing their religions in a respectful manner. The next subsection is called Using My Buddhist Flashlight, where Knitter's going to dig deeper into the mystical experience. He says that a mystical experience is one where you feel oneself connected to something or someone larger than oneself, like a larger being. In Buddhism, the terms to describe mystical experiences are a lot more broad. They use terms such as emptiness and groundlessness, whereas Christians like to use terms that are more direct, as in one with Christ or divine indwelling. He goes on to talk about Rahner's claim that humanity is infused by the grace of God. And he says that with the help of Buddhism saying nirvana is samsara, we're able to understand this a little bit more clearly, where Rahner is saying that everything that happens that humans think is natural is actually supernatural, because our humanity is infused with God's grace. While he's coming to these conclusions, he begins to realize that his God, or the God that he follows and believes in, resembles Sunyata and inner being very much. The next subsection is God inner being. This section is trying to find whether or not emptiness or inner being are appropriate symbols for God. And through Knitter's Christianity and Buddhism interfaith dialogue, he comes to the conclusion that they are appropriate symbols. He goes to quote John from the Bible, where John says, God is love. And this is not saying that God is a father who loves, but instead the very nature of God is to love. He then says that for Christians to believe in a Trinitarian God, they must believe in a relational God, where God to be is nothing other than God to relate. An example of this would be that Jesus was God's creation to show these relationships that are in the nature of God, which is to love.
Okay, we're running out of time. So, Corey, I think I'll ask you to stop here so that the three of us can chat a little bit more together. For all three of you, How did you find this chapter in terms of what you already know about interfaith dialogue? Do you think it was helpful to you to understand the way Knitter goes about putting in conversation two religious traditions? In other words, how would you rate it, and what did you find good and helpful about it?
After reading it, I thought it was a very good example of interfaith dialogue, because when he's talking about both Christianity and Buddhism, he's not separating the two totally and talking about how different they are, nor is he trying to put them together and make them one religion, but instead he's taking aspects from both of these religions and just finding the similarities to help, mainly help Christians understand Buddhism and to help further their understanding of Christianity. So I thought it was a very good example of interfaith dialogue.
Okay, Corey, you probably need to stop sharing your screen so that we can see everything.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that.
Okay, there we are. Okay, the other two of you, what would you like to say about the chapter?
Go.
I thought it was a good example because, like, it's sometimes in some parts of the read, it's hard to distinguish if he's talking about Christianity or Buddhism. It's a very good blend, and the lessons seem like they could be coming from both. So I think he kind of makes he makes an equal presentation of what both have to offer.
I found it interesting that when he was trying to describe, like, give examples of nirvana and samsara or sunyata, I feel like he didn't himself have a full understanding of them, and I feel like that's just because of how Buddhism is, and I thought that was very interesting.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next group. Let's see, Michaela Cortez, Emily Boston, and Holly Adams. You're all here, I believe. So you can go ahead and one of you or start sharing your screen, and you are going to be talking about women in interreligious dialogue.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so yeah, we had the Women in Interreligious Dialogue. We did chapter 10. That's beauty, beyond beauty, aesthetics and the emotion in interreligious dialogue.
Okay.
So the introduction, it begins with Michelle Roberts. It seems like she's the author of this, saying that her and Lalita, okay, a Christian devotee, hold on, I'm gonna move this because I can't see, have dialogue that is full of emotion. In this chapter, the author will discuss rasa, which is aesthetic emotion, and how it can offer a framework for being able to understand and respond effectively during religious dialogue. It will also offer a deeper comparison of ethical tensions in Hindu applications of the rasa and in Christian traditions. The comparison will allow us to move beyond the aesthetics and move to an interreligious encounter that involves emotion, body, and mind. So rasa, it is derived from an Indian tradition that can have the meaning of taste, relishing, or essence of a thing. She talks about a dance drama in Bharata's Natya Sastra and refers to emotional states from the audience. She says rasa is independent of beauty, so pleasant and unpleasant things can both evoke it. When watching the Natya Sastra, people become so engrossed into the world they fail to recognize how it happened. This is because the experience of the rasa takes the audience's concern of the ego to a place non-worldly, transcendent, and sublime. Rasa can have multiple ingredients. I'm not even going to try to pronounce those. So the first one is their excitants are contextual markers, and those include like magical illusions, architecture, and the appearance of divine beings. The second ingredient was the A one, and that is the effect of those stimuli. So the character might have wide eyes, a fixed gaze, tears of joy, those kind of things. And then the third one is emotions that move or change. They're transitory. They can also Where am I? Oh, they can also complement the main sentiment. Rasa is a subjective experience that arises from multiple factors that come together. So wonder as a religious orientation. Wonder can be described by theorists as a combination of all the rasas and can also be one of the fundamental religious orientations. Robert Fuller describes wonder as more than just a simple interest. He describes it as a central moment of devotional worship, the moment of seeing and being seen by divinity. Wonder makes us consider the reality of the unseen and pushes us to find the world's meaning and purpose. It has adaptive and cognitive functions. We'll put aside self-interest, then we can develop higher morals for the relationship with the environment and the world. Religious traditions not only ritualize the experience of wonder and use it for ethics, but they are also objects of wonder within themselves. And then interreligious dialogue allows us to search for similarities within our own, hold on, I really can't see that, own religions, but also allows us to be amazed by the complexity of other religious traditions.
Okay, so one subsection of this chapter is wonder and religious difference. And when we partake in interreligious dialogue, it can affect us on many levels, perhaps the most important being an emotional or affective level. Intellectually, we may try to reconcile what we already believe with what we have encountered. Spiritually, we may consider how the encounter affects our commitment to our religious tradition. She goes on to quote Francis X. Clooney, and he says that readers of religious texts put themselves in a situation where they can be transformed intellectually, imaginatively, and effectively. And the emotions that texts evoke on a person have an aesthetic force of their own, and they become rasas, which are emotions transmuted into a sense of aesthetic contemplation. She also quotes Hill Fletcher and says that the moment you do not understand is the key to collaboration. They express the idea that they will never fully understand anything. There will always be unknown. And the goal of this is to not exhaust comprehension or vindication of one's own beliefs, but to wonder itself. So to not fully understand something, they are saying is how you, when you question it, is how you start to understand it. The next section is about a sympathetic speculator. Here she talks about sahadras, and you become sahadras when you express wonder during interfaith encounters. Sahadras are people whose hearts are attenuated to the situation of the other. With the sympathetic spectator, the emotions expressed in a drama are elevated to their refined state through the combination of evocative situations, physical expressions, and emotional states compatible with it. Someone who is a sympathetic spectator knows to savor emotion itself. And to experience rasa within this, a spectator cannot be passive, and it will not appear if the person is not open to the magic. The sympathetic spectator has heartfelt absorption of the art, and it is the greatest quality that they have. Appreciating another's faith and caring about their distinctive qualities shows good rasa and encourages those to become sahadras. Then she goes on to talk about rasa and interreligious complementarity. Emotions such as transitory and nurturing allow sahadras to turn wonder into reflection on how an interfaith encounter affects their own faith. And when one appreciates other religious views, it can enhance their own views. The author describes this approach using Christianity as the base, but she does say that this can be switched out with any religion. She says Christianity, devotion, contemplation, or action may remain one central or stable emotion, yet these will be enriched or expanded on account of deep diversity of experience. So she's saying that your religion can become stronger through interfaith dialogue. When reading or partaking in interfaith dialogue, you have to put aside the things that are normal to you and try to avoid questions that evaluate the religion. Some might allow parts of other religions to affect them, while for some others, this might enhance their love for their own religion. Complementary reasoning allows the simultaneous existence of two apparently contradictory ideas.
So another section is ethical tensions.
So every aesthetic emotion has the potential to transport the attuned spectator to experience the divine. Wonder opens us to things that are beyond us, but threatens to close off critical inquiry. Wonder is often considered to be similar to temptation. So emotional evaluations such as like admiration, fear, disgust, we must discern them with ethical responses to people's beliefs that strike as appealing, strange, and revolting. We can be lost if we cease to be amazed by the differences. If one sets out to articulate a coherent theology through critical theology, they will be lost if they cease to be amazed by the difference again. So, sympathetic observers' desire of Krishna
Bhakti.
Bhakti doesn't mean that they must understand it as a different form of worship, the Holy Trinity, which is the distinct religious flavor. If she is eager to learn from her religious neighbors, she will then learn to appreciate their faith as particular idioms. The sympathetic observer then takes in these tastes of divine in a way that they will nurture the faith formed within her primary community. And this is what opens the faith up to wonder. Another section is a holistic approach to dialogue. So the holistic approach of feminist theology has contributed to the expansion of interreligious dialogue beyond the doctrine of and ethics. Interfaith connections can awaken your senses and leads to rituals and practices like meditation, yoga, services, and art. As said in the book, the Raza theory offers categories to analyze the physical, mental, and emotional means of evoking expression and modulating emotion. Raza is rooted in the body through physical stimuli that causes it to arise and through the appropriate physical responses. When women are associated with the beauty that objectifies them, holistic expansion of these is very liberating. A holistic feminine approach challenges the roles of the religious identity. It says, as understanding deepens, the sympathetic spectator who cultivates essential openness in the presence of the other temporarily forgets themselves. So with this other vision of reality, she can understand complementary emotional states that makes it the stable emotional tenor better for her primary religious identity. That's it.
Okay, kind of the same questions from the last group as well. How helpful was this chapter? How do you think it relates to what we've already been talking about? How would you rate it as a discussion of interfaith dialogue? Talk to us.
I would rate this as a good example of interfaith dialogue because I like how she discusses how many different angles you can come at interfaith dialogue. So she talks about how it could either make you question things within your religion or it could make you love your religion more. So she comes at it talking so many different aspects that could happen when you diverse in interfaith dialogue.
What did you all think about the concept of rasa? They talk a lot about it, and one of the definitions they come up with is the taste of a thing and how that affects you, whether you like it or you don't. For example, if you have nuclear hot tacos, do you like them? And if so, why? If so, why not? And then if you think about that in terms of religions, how that might help you think about, okay, well, this thing in that religion doesn't really appeal to me, but it has a certain flavor that I can deal with, that I can think about and learn from.
Yeah, it kind of helps like express one's emotions towards everything.
Mhm.
Like it gives you reason to say, I like this, but these parts I don't like, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot because it mentioned Raza a lot.
Yeah.
All had different meanings. I feel like a lot of the time, but I thought this chapter was good. A good example of interreligious dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any connections to the class in general? in terms of what we have been studying?
I guess it. Go ahead.
It didn't really like connect to any religion in particularly. Like it was kind of just a broad spectrum of like interreligious dialogue, like how to approach it and stuff. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments you would like to make?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on to the next group, which would be Ryan Harkin, Gennaro Valenti, and Jake Baker. And you're doing, I believe, chapter 1 of the book on Christians and Jews in Dialogue? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, we're ready for you.
Okay. All right. Are you guys seeing this?
Yes.
Okay.
Click present, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm going. Where's that?
Right there. Yeah.
Right, do you just want to keep it up the whole time and then flip through it for us?
Sure.
All right.
So we have, hang on one second. Christian and Jews, learning in the presence of other. And this is chapter 1.
Mhm.
Here we go. So we have the background. We started with a little background of the authors. First one is Sarah S. Lee. She
Nobody doesn't like.
what?
Sarah Lee, whom nobody doesn't like.
Yeah,
You get that?
yeah. The
Yeah, all right, go for it.
She helped to transform day schools. She is a Jewish influencer and educator. She received an award from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for her vision, skill, and commitment, which is a big one. She earned her master's in Jewish education, in which led her to become a director at the Rhea Hirsch School of Education. She took part in the interfaith work for the Lilly Endowment Colloquium for Catholic and Jewish Educators and was an educator on 3 books for Jewish education. And our other author, Mary C. Boyes, an American scholar that specialized in religious studies. She's the Dean of Academic Affairs at McLean, Professor of Practical Theology and Theological Seminary in New York City. And she's the former professor of religious education at Boston College. She published 6 books speaking on the interfaith of Jewish and Catholic religions. And she's a Seattle native. She has been a member since 1965 of the Sisters of Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, a congregation of Roman Catholic women. So we have 2 very different authors here.
Mhm.
And I just think that was good to include. So Jews and Christians, a complicated relationship. So people of different religious beliefs have had differences forever. It's just something that's going to happen, obviously. I mean, it's like you're looking one end or the other. It doesn't mean that one is wrong. It's just how you see it. The only true way to have and maintain peace is through dialogue. Sadly, for many centuries, this has not been the case, and people would rather fight than talk. Examples of this you can see are the Crusades, fighting between Muslims and Hindus in India, Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, the persecution of Jews throughout history, and the differences within the Sunni and Shia. Making space for religious difference. So we have Christians. The Catholic Church today is very tolerant of people of different faiths. Key word today in that one. This has not always been the case. The Second Vatican Council has mainly changed that, as we've learned. Now in Catholicism, Jews are known as those most dear to God, but before, only people who were Catholic have salvation. Not all Protestants have this view. Example of this would be the Patrick Henry College Statement of Faith. Jews, just as conflicted, obviously. I mean, there's confliction within everybody. Only Jews have to follow Jewish law, but non-Jews should follow the 7 Noahide commandments. These include not committing murder, adultery, robbery.
Idolatry.
What?
Idolatry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's what I thought I said. Robbery, etc. Some view Christianity as idolatrous, seeing Jesus as the divine. Orthodoxy cannot talk about faith, but can talk about politics and other issues. Modern day Jews don't see it this way, and Christians can talk about faith with most Jews today. And this is educating beyond tolerance for a textured particularism. Moving beyond religious tolerance, when trying to break down religious stereotypes and misconceptions, there is a desire to do more than increase tolerance of other religions. Tolerance, while necessary, does not lead to understanding a religious other or learning anything about them. Tolerance simply allows people to live with others who are different without degrading their existence. We must be willing to learn about someone of another religion if we want to create interfaith dialogue with them. And then pluralism, opposite from tolerance, pluralism demands us to pursue understandings of a religious other. Pluralism is built upon respect for religious differences that stem from knowledge of one's own tradition. People who are knowledgeable and have a commitment to their own religion are set up the best to contribute in a religiously pluralistic environment. This is accomplished by teaching in a textured particularism, a keen sense of the beliefs and practices of one's own religion and tradition, as well as the finitude of that religion.
Can you tell you a little bit more about textured particularism? So, would you rephrase that that definition?
How, like, what do you mean?
Well, what do they mean by particularism?
Well, they're just saying, like, I mean, what do I think it means?
It's actually on the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump the
You
scale.
jumped the gun a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
There's three different types of particularism: insular, textured, and adversarial. And the textured is like having a clear and like more of an acute sense of the beliefs and practices of your religion and its traditions. So it means you're more focused, you're practicing more, you're into your faith. But insular is actually the complete opposite of textured, and it's very superficial as it relates to its focus on religion. And this is a result of people having a lack of knowledge of their religion, and like lack of knowledge not of their own religion, but like other than their own. So like they can't really connect with other faiths because they're projecting concepts of their own religion onto everyone else. This lack of knowledge like of other faiths causes dialogue to be very difficult between religions. And adversarial particularism, it diminishes and demonizes people of other religions, and it gives way to bigotry and discrimination as a result of religious differences. And textured particularism is very rare. Inadequate religions, education, and lack of like family involvement are big reasons why people lack textured religious identity. Having a textured religious identity like allows for engagement with people of other faiths around the world, so you can connect more, like intertwined cultures, learn more about each other. Christians and Jews are closely related in terms of their history and where they stem from theologically, and like because they have more of a connection because they were kind of brought up together. Christianity was kind of built off Judaism, and like this lack of knowledge of their own religions, as well as the others, like had led to tension between the two groups throughout history since basically the beginning of both faiths. Having more textured particularism and less adversarial could lead to better relations between the two religions. Jews and Christians, like it's a very complicated relationship. The background, the origins of Christianity are linked to Judaism, and there are limited opportunities for Christians and Jews connect on a personal level due to demographic separations. These demographic separations have been around like for generations. Basically, the Christians need to they don't believe that their faith stemmed off of another faith, and they feel superior, so it makes it harder for them to have interreligious dialogue with each other. And there's a high percentage of Jews in only 14 countries throughout the world, while Christianity has many more. And there's a lot of problems with limited Christian-Jew contact. Like the faiths don't really share information between each other. It's very hard for them to connect. And it's Christian understanding of Judaism is dependent on how they understand the complexities of the origins of Christianity. This basically means that Christians need to learn that Judaism helped form Christianity, and that they need to learn that so they can help connect the faiths. continued of a complicated relationship. This is like kind of an example of like a Christian misunderstanding Judaism. This is a short story. A traveling young rabbi who often carried religious artifacts had ingredients to cook a meal for congregants. A security guard saw the oil and announced it was for an animal sacrifice. This idea originated from the security guard that it was an animal sacrifice because the security guard was familiar with the Old Testament. The Old Testament contains detailed accounts of religious sacrifices. She associated Jews with the people in the Old Testament. So it's kind of like a misunderstanding of Judaism in a sense. Christian stereotypes from a Jewish perspective. Since Jews don't have to interpret Christianity for a self-understanding, their view of Christianity comes from a broader culture. Dominance of evangelicals on TV and in public forums have caused Jews to associate all Christians with the teachings of conservative activists. Jews associate Christianity with hostility and hate. Some Jewish teachings depict anti-Semitism and Christianity as inseparable equals, which is very false, but it is what they think. And this is examples of Jews and Christian experience. Mary, one of the authors, who was co-teaching a different Faces of God course with Jewish women, and the class was primarily made up of Jews, and the class members attended a Holy Thursday liturgy at a local church. During this liturgy, priests washed churchgoers' feet, invited others to do the same, and they performed hymns emphasizing God's love. So it's kind of an example of like that the author tells like of Jews kind of in a Christian experience, going through Christian like experiences in their church, different things that they wouldn't experience in their own faith.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Jews and Christians of fundamental asymmetry. So asymmetry is the lack of equality or equivalence of parts and aspects of something. So one fundamental conviction: when Jews are in the presence of Christians, historians are always on the table. Is always on the table.
History?
History. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong thing.
I had a vision of history scholars dancing on top of a tabletop.
Yeah.
Sorry. So history is always on the table. Jews build their identity as much on history as on core beliefs of tradition. History plays a central part in Jewish self-understanding. And what this means is the opening part of this section, and it begins by talking about how history is so important to the Jewish culture, and that sometimes it can create conflict between the two religions, which makes them asymmetric. Sorry. There are also strong feelings and intensity between them that brings a different emotional side out, which has been ongoing.
And then I just wanted to add something really quick that wasn't like we didn't include in the slides. This was just like from my personal and like from other materials we've read, like whereas people usually tend to think of like Christianity as like the daughter of the Jewish religion, whereas they should be looking at it as like sisters or brothers, you know what I mean, siblings, not what the like as something stemming from another.
So Jews and Christians, a fundamental asymmetry continued. So it has been shown to make the Jews upset that Christians use the practices and traditions of Jews, such as Passover. The Jews believe that since Christians are using their ideas and practices, it eliminated the meaning behind those. It also been said from the Jews' perspective that is a problematic how Christianity has roots of Judaism through it. Jews have felt despised by the church, the Crusades, the ghettos, etc., which reveals that they can't have honest religious grounded relationships with Christians until they face their own history. Continued again. Christianity is based on the life, death, and teaching of Jesus, but there are still teachings that come from Judaism that are practiced today, like how in Christianity there is only one God, as well in Judaism they believe in one God. Christians have acknowledged Judaism as a vestige, I'm saying that right, of the past and promised to their fulfillment. Jews reject the belief of one God in the human form. there's just not a similar groundwork from these two religions, but there has been a transformation process between Jews and Christians. Many ignore the fact that these religions are much different down to the roots from when they became. There's a lack of connection between their traditions, and that is normal because each religion has their own celebrations and rituals. Obviously, a transformation takes time. That is why there are many steps to the two religions connecting, and the next step they did to take action was the education aspect. When the two groups came together and mixed cultural techniques, turmoil was how it ended in some cases. And the types of dialogue of the theological exchange. In some way, there is an exchange of knowledge between the two religions about their spiritual understandings. Dialogue of life, there is some activity between Christians and Jews to try and have an open relationship, but only part of the time. They've socialized and still do today. Dialogue of action, same goes for this, but in the sense that there was conflict in the way of interreligious activity, but there has been collaboration. And that was the last slide.
Okay. That slide we didn't have someone talk about, or this last slide?
Did I already read it? Oh, okay, sorry. Interfaith dialogue. This was a good example of interfaith dialogue because there are several interactions between Christians and Jews. There are similarities that the two share as well as conflict, which is normal for opposing religions. The positive result from this was the way the two faiths created cultural techniques from both sides. I'm sorry, I thought I read that slide.
Okay, all right. Okay, can you stop sharing the screen so we can have a see everyone?
Sorry.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to comment on in terms of the way this book was written and the way the two authors interact with each other? Or I remember Mary Boyes was the lecturer, I think, for the video you did for your
Chosen.
yeah, in your Chosen Tradition video. So did she seem like the same kind of person, or did it fit well with what she had said in the lecture? Or
I mean, I think it fit. I think it fit well, like as well as it could. When you're reading, it's like it was nice to have already have a picture of her. So I feel like it just made me already think of her, you know what I mean, just of what she had to say. But I don't know. That's just my opinion.
I felt like it was a lot easier to understand, like the way she explained things, and it was it helped me learn a lot more than I knew. I didn't know a lot about this chapter of the book before, but she made it very easy to understand.
Mhm.
So it was it really helped broaden your mind. It really taught you the differences and the complications and throughout the history of Judaism and Christianity. So I feel she made it really easy to understand.
Mhm. Okay, any other questions from anybody else or comments from you all? Okay, we'll go on with the presentations for next time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, I will end the meeting.